Research Center in Laurel, Maryland. Behind me are young whooping crane chicks. These little guys have no idea what's in store for them. For example, their parents are biologists from the U.S. Geologic Survey. When teaching these little guys, they use crane costumes like this, developed by the International Crane Foundation in Baraboo, Wisconsin. This is all an elaborate effort to make sure that the species does not go extinct. In a few weeks, these little guys will be off to Wisconsin. Come on. Sorry about that. I had to whisper back there because the whooping cranes, the rarest cranes in the world, aren't supposed to hear human voices. As a matter of fact, it's against the rules to even talk in the presence of cranes. Isn't that right? I know this sounds a little bizarre, but that's because it is a little bizarre. But in order to understand where we are, we have to take a look back to the late 1800s. At that time, the whooping crane population numbered fewer than 1,500 individuals and ranged widely across North America. During the summer, whooping cranes, one of two species of crane in North America, could be found in northern Canada and as far south as Mexico City during the winter. With so few cranes in such a large range, the whooping crane was a rare sight even back then. During the late 1800s, European settlement in North America boomed. The great prairie wetlands of the Central Plains were drained and then converted into grain belts that fed hungry mouths in the east. The whooping crane, the tallest bird in North America, is a water-loving bird by nature and feeds on aquatic life forms. So when North America's wetlands began to disappear, so did the whooping crane's habitat. Hunting and egg collection also played a role in the crane's plight. Each wetland converted to agriculture and each bird brought to the table for dinner brought the species closer to extinction. Whooping crane numbers continued to drop. By 1941, only one migratory flock remained, and it numbered only 15 birds. The whooping crane edged so close to extinction, it was thought that the bird would join the ranks of the dodo and the passenger pigeon. Yet a glimmer of hope remained. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and more recently the Endangered Species Act, protected whooping cranes and required government wildlife agencies to work to protect the species from extinction. On the Gulf Coast of Texas, Aransas National Wildlife Refuge was formed in 1937 to protect the whooping crane's only known wintering location. While the wintering location of the birds had been identified, the breeding range remained a mystery for many years. In 1954, an airborne forester spotted the summer breeding grounds of the whooping cranes in Wood Buffalo National Park in the Northwest Territories of Canada. Soon after, biologists confirmed the exact locations of these birds. The whooping crane could become extinct rapidly if a disease, parasite, or natural disaster like a hurricane came upon them. Scientists were concerned and devised plans to save this fragile species. Whooping cranes usually lay 2 eggs each spring, but typically only one chick survives to adulthood. Collecting one of the eggs and incubating it at captive breeding facilities appeared to be one way to quickly double the reproduction rate, with very little effect on the wild whooping crane population. In 1967, the Canadian Wildlife Service began collecting eggs from wild whooping crane nests in Wood Buffalo National Park. The Canadian Wildlife Service sent these eggs to the U.S. Geological Survey's Patuxent Wildlife Research Center. The eggs were hatched and the cranes were raised in captivity, with the hope that the captive raised birds could be released back into the wild. In 1975, whooping crane eggs were introduced into sandhill crane nests in Grays Lake, Idaho. The sandhill is a close cousin to the whooping crane, and scientists hoped they would act as surrogate parents. Cranes learn many things from their parents, including a migration route. The young whooping cranes raised at Grays Lake naturally followed their foster parents to Bosque del Apache Wildlife Refuge in New Mexico.
This experiment struggled because the whooping cranes thought they were sandhill cranes. When it came time to mate, they failed to form suitable pairs.
Modern-day problems also affect the wild whooping cranes. For instance, collisions with power lines have killed dozens of cranes over the years. Also, fast-growing South Texas cities are using up freshwater resources. This changes the ecology of Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. Blue crabs, a primary source of food for the wild cranes, are being displaced from the whooping crane's habitat as the salinity of the winter marshlands increase. Less high-energy food fuels the crane's spring migration and may result in fewer chicks raised in the northern breeding grounds. In 1975, the Whooping Crane Recovery Team was formed in the United States and later joined by Canadian wildlife officials. The team wrote a recovery plan that called for 40 breeding pairs in the Aransas wood buffalo flock by the year 2000, and 2 additional wild populations with a minimum of 25 breeding pairs each by 2020. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agreed to implement this plan. Since 1993, over 200 captive hatch chicks from the U.S. and Canada have been released in Central Florida to establish a wild but non-migratory flock. Today, the flock totals nearly 100 individuals. This flock is growing steadily under the watchful eye of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. But the recovery plan still required a third distinct flock. This would prove far more challenging because the flock would need to be taught to migrate. But how can humans without an existing flock teach cranes to migrate? Oh, coincidentally, while the Whooping Crane Recovery Team was grappling with this question, migration experiments were underway, including the seemingly crazy idea of training birds to follow a slow-flying ultralight airplane.
In the early 90s, my friend Joe Duff and I did our first experiments with Canada geese. We led a flock from Ontario down to Virginia. In the following spring, they came back on their very own. Not only came back, but they came right back to the spot we'd taken off from.
The event triggered worldwide interest. Operation Migration Story captured the attention of Columbia Pictures, and they popularized the technique of flying with birds in the movie Fly Away Home. More importantly, though, the scientific community, including the Whooping Crane Recovery Team, took note of their work. Many people began to think, if geese could be taught a migration route, maybe other birds could be taught as well. Bill and Joe continued their work with sandhill cranes, and all of the birds came back to the location where they fledged.
The recovery team suggested reintroducing a migratory flock of whooping cranes into eastern North America, far away from the current Aransas wood buffalo flock, in order to prevent the possibility of disease ever being spread between the two flocks. Because the whooping crane is so rare, there's a great deal of interest in recovery of this species by many different organizations. State agencies, together with federal and private nonprofit organizations, came together to form the Whooping Crane Eastern Partnership in order to promote this migration experiment. One of the first tasks at hand was to identify an acceptable migration route. Many biologists believe that the best migration route would be the historic route used by the whooping crane between Wisconsin and Florida.
After a general migration path was established, the team needed to select suitable locations for the cranes to live.
Necedah National Wildlife Refuge in central Wisconsin was selected as the release area. There are vast expanses of wetlands at Necedah, and nearby there are many privately owned lands with lots of wetlands, particularly the cranberry farms. In the southeast, Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge was selected because of its abundance of blue crabs and its sweeping expanse of wetlands.
Okay, so the partnership selected 2 locations that the birds could fly between that happened to be 1,200 miles apart. So how do you get cranes to follow an ultralight that far? During the spring, the costume biologists here at Patuxent hatch whooping cranes and perform early role model and aircraft conditioning. The cranes are being conditioned to accept the ultralight and bond with the crane puppets and adult whooping cranes. The cranes are then transported to Necedah Refuge, where the painstaking process of teaching the birds to trust and follow the small aircraft will continue. Each day, the growing birds are brought out of their predator-proof pens to exercise their wings. The crane's natural instinct is to follow their parents, so when the mechanical surrogate goes up, so does Junior. By autumn, the juvenile cranes are ready to migrate from Necedah to the Chassahowitzka National Wildlife Refuge. But getting whooping cranes to follow an ultralight presents its own unique problems.
In the wild, cranes are soaring birds. They can cover hundreds of miles each day while on migration. They rise thousands of feet on thermals and then simply glide to the next rising column of air and so on. During our migration, they can surf on the weight created by the aircraft. This lends them some assistance, but they still have to flap their wings a lot and they tire quickly.
The solution to this problem was solved when Operation Migration set up a roster of willing landowners every 30 miles or so along the migration route. The right candidate for the job of migration host needed not only to be willing, but have an airstrip and a remote, quiet location for the team to set up the overnight crane pens and camping equipment. These kind-hearted supporters allow the cranes and crew to rest on their property each night during the migration.
We love to do this kind of stuff because we love preservation and conservation, and we've really enjoyed it and hope that we can be part of it next year and years to come when they come back through.
Once the cranes arrive at Chassahowitzka Refuge in late fall, biologists monitor the birds while they build energy reserves. The following spring, the cranes will migrate back to Wisconsin on their own. Satellite and radio transmitters allow the biologists to track the whooping cranes. Once this flock is established, additional young whooping cranes will be introduced directly into this migratory flock, with the old birds passing on the migration route to the new ones. After many successive years, the flock will eventually be large enough to sustain itself. The Whooping Crane Eastern Partnership's goal is to see a self-sustaining flock of whooping cranes fly free over the eastern half of North America. Through the success of this project, they will have taken a significant step to ensure the survival of the species.
Watching cranes fly behind the ultralight can be an incredibly emotional experience. You're not just watching cranes, you're watching humans resetting the course for this species. That's when you begin to really think that there is hope. Humans and the natural ecosystems on which we live can coexist. I'm convinced of that. But we need to be committed and act upon a conviction to live side by side with nature. And through the power of partnership, we're going all out to save one species of bird. And in turn, we're setting an example of what can be done for other species. These birds represent conservation. And as we bring back these birds, we set a new day for conservation in this country.
It's very difficult to introduce any bird species back into the wild. I think the whooping crane is so special and such a symbol of conservation in America that no matter how hard we have to work with the whooping crane, I don't think we can give up. I'm not sure we can give up on any species. Any species has so much to contribute to just life on this planet, and it's man's responsibility to do everything we can to save these species. There really is reason for optimism. Although there's less than 200 birds in the Aransas wood buffalo flock, it is growing at 4% a year. We have about 400 whooping cranes in North America. Biologists have learned how to breed whooping cranes in captivity, and biologists are pioneering ways to reintroduce new flocks into the wild. So although the whooping crane was at one time right on the brink of extinction, this comeback is really the reason that the whooping crane is the symbol of conservation in North America. Our long-term goal is to have the whooping crane remain wild and free and allow people to come see the whooping crane for generations to come, because they are such a magnificent bird and bring such enjoyment to so many people around the world. One of the most fascinating parts of the whooping crane recovery story is we don't know how it's going to end. I don't know every year whether more or less whooping cranes will come back from Canada. We are working very, very hard, doing everything we can to try to save the whooping crane, but the final result is still an unknown. To help the whooping crane, people really need to get involved with conservation issues. We have to have a strong voice coming from citizens throughout America demanding wildlife be saved. They need to get very involved with promoting saving wetlands, and I think in that way you can do the most to help whooping cranes.
Together as partners, we can make a positive change for the whooping crane and the environment. To learn more about this exciting project, contact us on the web at www.bringbackthecranes.org. My name is Graham Greene. Thank you.